365. First one we've had of those in a while. You got your Mac guys, John McMullen and Jody McDonald, here with you for the next 2 hours. A couple of good guests coming your way. Johnny Mac, we mentioned the stages of grief yesterday. Don't know if closure is one of them. I don't think so. Acceptance, closure.
Acceptance, yeah.
Right.
No,
So,
no closure. No
yeah, no
closure.
closure. So I did, because that's the word I wanted to ask you about today was closure. Yesterday, we got to hear from both Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman in a joint interview, not separate, which I would have preferred, but that's just me. I'm a picky guy. And they answered a lot of questions about how the season ended and where we go from here. So there was a sense of closure to the 2022 football season after their loss in Super Bowl 57. Did you get that? Did you feel any closure after hearing from the head coach and the general manager this
Well, I
past
think it was
night?
different. So it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Those are the 5 stages. I felt Howie was at 4. I felt he was depressed, to be honest. And I felt Nick was at 5. I think Nick has accepted it and moved on. In a lot of ways, one of the amazing things about football coaches is their optimism. They have to be optimistic. They have to be. You can't be a pessimistic person. I'm a very cynical person. I think most journalists are.
Oh, well,
Can't.
time out. And then there's Belichick. What the hell do you call him?
He's optimistic.
He hides it well. If that's the case, he does a hell of a job of
One of
hiding
the
it.
things your buddies with Gary Myers. One of the stories he always tells is when he got to sit next to Belichick. Same thing with Andy Reid. They have this in front of the camera mentality, and then everybody gets to know them behind the scenes. Yeah, that guy's got a good sense of humor. That guy's got. You got to be incredibly optimistic to be a football coach. Even the hard-nosed guys, you want to go back to the Bill Parcells of the world. Again, there's certain instances where they get angry at a player and they might call him she or something like that. But, you have to go through this grind each and every day. You have to get each and every player better. It doesn't matter. One season you might have great personnel like this season for the Eagles. Next season you might have lesser personnel. You still got to go to work. You still got to make the best of it. So they're all now. Nick wears it on the sleeve. He's obviously optimistic, where somebody like Bill doesn't. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me that he's farther along. Howie looked depressed, man. He really did. He looked depressed.
He looks.
They know. They missed a golden opportunity. They understand that.
How he looks scarred, because that was the word he chose to describe the team and himself, that yes, he was scarred by that loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. But we did learn a lot from the press conference. It was, I know you told me during the week, you thought you were going to hear from Howie, not necessarily Nick, and they came out in tandem. It was much more of a Nick Sirianni press conference than a Howie Roseman press conference. Some of that is dictated by you guys asking the questions. Were you as surprised that it was as lopsided as it was?
No, because, remember, you don't get to talk to the head coach. Typically, you have the post-game press conference during the regular season, which you had at the Super Bowl, but you don't get a lot of information from that because hasn't watched the film, and they kind of lean, well, I haven't seen the film. I got to watch the film. And then, you get them the next day when they've watched it and you get more concrete answers to things. So with the Super Bowl, you didn't get that second one. So you wanted to get some answers about the question. But the other part of that was Howie had already spoken to us behind the scenes, and he wasn't going to get into a lot of off-season stuff until the combine. So we knew that as well. So, you can waste time or you can try to go different directions.
Yeah,
So
but
part of it was
here's where I would disagree with that, and perfect yesterday with him being available. If they hadn't lost their offensive coordinator and their defense coordinator, I'd buy what you're saying. Listen, he's not going to say anything about the offseason until he gets to the combine. Fine, you can almost get away with that.
well,
When
I
you
meant
have
more
two main
personnel.
coaches decide to go elsewhere and take other jobs, And oh, by the way, some things we found out yesterday about how hands-on the general manager was in hiring of the last staff. Well,
Yes, by the way. Yeah.
exactly.
I need my apologies from a lot of
House on
listeners.
that in a second,
Yeah.
but let me finish the point. Howie and Jeffrey like to be involved, if not call the
Yeah.
shots on the coaching staff. So now that two guys have walked out the door and gotten head coaching jobs, yeah, Howie Roseman needs to be questioned. He can't just say, "Yeah, catch me at the combine." Then I'll start giving you guys
No,
some
when he was
information
asked
about the
about the
offseason.
assistants, Look, last time I think, they were very hands-on with Doug. We all know they were too hands-on. I think, I don't know if everybody knows that, but a lot of people think they were too hands-on. I think, because the last hire, Nick, was such a strange process. Look at all the processes this year. Arizona being the last. It's kind of normal. It's kind of normal. That season, remember, the Eagles were planning on running it back with Doug Peterson. Jeffrey Lurie just wanted to approve his plan and all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, he didn't like Doug's plan for the coaching staff. And then he was fired very late. Not typically, you're fired, right after the season. Sometimes before the season ends and you have interim coaches. So it was very late. And they were behind the 8 ball. They wanted to talk to Robert Saleh, but he was already along with the Jets, and pretty much it was a fait accompli, and Arthur Smith, and he was already along with 10. Those were the hot candidates at the time, and they got a late start. They weren't able to get involved with them. Then they kind of said, oh, maybe it's going to be Josh McDaniels. He's going to be the guy. Thank God he wasn't. And that's where they got Jonathan Gannon. They got to meet Jonathan Gannon because he's very close with Josh McDaniels. And they said, well, this guy's going to be our coordinator, our defensive coordinator. They really liked him. I didn't even know. They decided Shane Steichen was going to be the offensive coordinator before they decided that Nick Sirianni was going to be the head coach. That was even new to me. I knew it about Gannon. I didn't know about Steichen. So it was a very weird process, and it worked out in the end. So nobody's got it. But they're never going to do that process again. Ultimately, maybe maybe the tail is wagging the dog in the essence of, all right, we got Gannon, we got Steichen. Let's get somebody who's familiar with them. Maybe that helped Nick. I think everyone assumed, oh, Nick's here, so he's got a history with Shane Steichen. He's got a history with Jonathan Gannon. I said it for the longest time. It had nothing to do with Gannon. Gannon was going to be the DC no matter who they decided was going to be the head coach. And it turns out Steichen as well. So maybe it was the other way around. And typically that's not the way you want to go about things. But remember, Nick didn't have a lot of power at the time. That was his only interview, was really underneath the radar. Now, 2 years later, it looks like a phenomenal move, but that's probably not the way you want to go about it, to be honest. It worked out, but that's a bad process.
I like the way you use the phrase "the tail walking the dog" because that's the way that it kind of played. But it did. Sometimes that works out phenomenally, and I would stay away from using never. You and I maybe never. We're not going to be around long enough, but you never know what's going to happen. This could come to fruition. And shoot, it did work. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Eagles went back down this road again of hiring coordinators before the head coach. Not the way it's usually done.
The whole process. I mean, even going back to Doug, firing somebody that late to put yourself in that kind of, it's never going to happen again. I mean, if it does, something went drastically wrong. And I think the Eagles know that's probably not the best process, but it would have to be a young coach who doesn't have a lot of cachet, and that was Nick at the time. And here we are, and now all of a sudden he's got a lot of cachet, and he does. He's become the it guy. I said it the other day, whether people realize it or not, he has overtaken Sean McVay as the it guy. Oh, you want to coach? Let's go look at Nick's staff. And, you know, that means you get to put your foot down a little bit more. And we'll see how that shakes out in the coming days and weeks and months and years, hopefully.
And the way that Sirianni, but maybe he is a good actor because, yes, you're right. He came off as a guy who had gotten to the acceptance level. I hope he's a good actor in front of the cameras and maybe a little bit different behind the scenes. The thing that I thought was most telling, at least is going to have the biggest effect for next year that we got from yesterday's press conference is, despite them not being ready to officially announce that they're elevating someone to the offensive coordinator from their own pre-existing staff, Brian Johnson. Whoever they choose as their next offense coordinator, Nick Sirianni plans on making sure that they're calling the plays, that he is going to buy into the John McMullen CEO coaches are the best coaches in the National Football League mindset, that it hasn't bothered him. He hasn't been calling plays. Certainly, we speculated here on Birds when we knew that Steichen was going to be out the door, that Nick may at least consider going back to calling plays, taking that responsibility on. He told us without much hesitation yesterday, that's not the case. He likes the way he is a head coach in the National Football League now and has no intention of going back to calling plays.
Yeah, and I think it says two things. It says, well, one, I mean, obviously he understands the tremendous success. I mean, they were 22-7. I did the math since Shane Steichen took over as the play caller. So, you know, it worked out pretty well. Now, I think Shane's a really good play caller. So we have to wait and see what Brian Johnson, but I think the bigger part is that's a clear indication Brian Johnson's getting the job. And if it's not Brian Johnson, it's going to be Kevin Patullo, because Nick wouldn't be saying, I'm not going to call the plays to somebody he doesn't know, you know, and somebody's bringing in off the street. So I think there's two layers to that. Not that we already didn't know, but yeah, Brian Johnson's going to be the next offensive coordinator, and he's comfortable enough that he's going to allow him to call plays, and I think that's a good thing. Now, is he going to be as good as Shane at it? I really like Shane Steichen as play caller because I've gotten to talk to him a lot, and just this whole philosophy of, you know, he's kind of egoless. He doesn't, you know, care about looking good. He doesn't, you know, you can't stop this. I'm going to do this. You know, and it sounds like common sense, but it isn't common sense with these guys. It really isn't. And, you know, nobody's going to know that Brian's called plays in college at Utah, Houston, helped out at Florida with Dan Mullen. So he's got a lot of experience at the college level calling plays, and he played quarterback, for those who don't know. He's a really good college quarterback. And hopefully it works out. But, you know, when you lose good coordinators, there tends to be a little bit of a learning curve. You know, you're not going to hit the ground running. There's going to be some growing pains.
And you talked about Nick Sirianni and his meteoric rise 2 years ago. Was Nick who? Wait, who are the Eagles hiring as their head coach? Who is Nick Sirianni? Well, 2 years later, he's a rainmaker and getting guys other gigs around the National Football League. You could say the same thing about Shane Steichen, that when the Eagles hired him, and we found out yesterday that they hired him before they hired the head coach. Kind of a surprise, but when they did, people were like, Shane Steichen, really? He's got play caller? He's going to be offensive coordinator? Or Sirianni's going to call the plays, but he's our offensive coordinator. Why do we even need this Steichen guy? And now, as you just stated, he's one of the more respected play callers in the entire National Football League. And just 2 years after being in the who is Shane Steichen category, he's now the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. So, yeah, the Eagles have become an organization that the rest of the National Football League respects and is ready to turn their organization over on big job placement to guys who scratched their surface here in Philadelphia. All right, the other thing that Nick talked about yesterday, and we'll get to this for just a couple minutes before we punch up our first guest, our buddy Chris Franklin. First question, why didn't you go for it on fourth down? Nothing like cutting straight to the chase. I would suggest one of the more debatable topics since the game was over and done with. You and I talked about it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday as well. That I didn't think he should have gone for it then. I think
Well,
those were
I didn't. It was funny because Nick brought up Bob Lang, the Eagles PR guy who prepared him for the question, and he said, "Yeah, I didn't even think it was an issue until Bob prepared me." And I agreed with him. Like, I didn't even know it was an issue. Like watching, oh, it's 4th and 3 or 32. You got to punt the football. Now, if it's 4th and 1 and you can do the tush push like they did against San Francisco, that's fine. But at 4th and 3 is not 4th and 1. You can't do the tush push. So, yeah, you got to punt the football. I've heard so many, like the defense was playing poorly. And I had a couple fans say, well, they're just going to score anyway if you punt it, so you might as well go for it. You can't coach a football team assuming, oh, my defense is so they're going to give up a touchdown every single time. I mean, come on. That's not. I'm 100% with Nick. That's not even an issue. That's not even an issue. 4th and 3, their aggressiveness brings this up in people's minds.
right.
But they're successful with their aggressiveness because generally they're not stupid with their aggressiveness. So that's how I would describe that.
They don't take bad percentage chances, and that would have been a bad percentage chance. And again, I can't speak for everyone who is second guessing and go, "Oh, he should have gone for it." It's real easy to say after they return to punt 65 yards to the 5-yard line that, "Oh, how did you not go for it there yet?" When the ball's coming off the punter's foot, Shankopotamus, wrong side of the field, yeah, then it gets real easy to second guess. But I like the fact that he went 32 out of 32 coaches in the National Football League are probably punting the ball there. So, yeah, he addressed that early. We're going to address plenty for you here on Birds 365 today. Got two solid Eagle guests coming your way. Our usual Monday guy after the fact. We're a little late to get to him this week.
A lot of travel, a lot of issues this week coming back from Phoenix. Yeah, I think I'm still jet lagged.
He's looking okay for non-jet lag. Franklin's in there waving, shaking his head in the waiting room. Chris Franklin from NJ.com is going to jump aboard with us coming up in just a couple of minutes. A little later, Les Bowen, longtime Eagle beat writer, is going to be on with us. Lots of Eagle stuff going forward with yesterday's Sirianni and Howie Roseman media availability. We'll break it all down for you. Chris Franklin first, Les Bowen a little later.